It was a cold, crisp February evening when Claire McKinley stepped out of her car, her boots crunching the snow beneath her feet. The small town of Brampton Hollow, tucked away in the hills of New England, had always been known for its quiet charm. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, where the pace of life was slow, and the winters were long and bitter. But tonight was different. It was Valentine's Day, and for the first time in years, Claire had decided to visit the old Victorian mansion on the outskirts of town. It had been abandoned for as long as anyone could remember, but rumors of its haunted past had always kept people away. Still, Claire wasn't superstitious. She was a journalist, and this Valentine's night was just another chance to explore the strange and unusual, to write her next big story. The mansion loomed ahead, dark and imposing against the backdrop of the snowy night. The gates creaked in the wind, and the windows, once grand and pristine, were now shattered, reflecting the moonlight in jagged shards. Despite the chill, Claire couldn't help but feel a strange pull toward the house, a sense of intrigue that gripped her as she walked closer. She had heard the stories, of course. Everyone in town had. The mansion had once been the home of the Valmont family, a wealthy couple who had been well respected and admired in Brampton Hollow. But their happiness hadn't lasted. On a bitterly cold Valentine's night many years ago, the Valmonts had been found dead in the house, their bodies arranged in a way that seemed almost ritualistic. No one knew what had happened to them, but rumors spread that their deaths were tied to a curse that had been passed down through generations. Claire hadn't believed in such things, curses, ghosts, the supernatural, but the house itself seemed to hold a strange energy. It called to her, as though the walls were whispering her name. She pushed open the rusted gate, its hinges groaning in protest. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and decay as she walked up the overgrown path, her breath forming clouds in the frigid night. The front door, once a grand entryway, now hung crooked on its hinges. Claire hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside. The darkness inside the mansion was suffocating. The only light came from the faint glow of the moon filtering through the broken windows. Dust floated in the air like ghosts, and the floorboards creaked under her weight as she moved cautiously through the hall. She pulled out her flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom, revealing the remnants of a once opulent home. The grand staircase was still there, though the banister was chipped and worn. The wallpaper, faded and peeling, hung in tatters. It was clear that no one had set foot here in years. She took a deep breath and pressed on, her footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The mansion seemed to grow colder as she moved deeper into its heart. A chill crept up her spine, but she pushed the feeling aside. It was just the cold, the isolation of the house. It had nothing to do with the rumors. But then she heard it. A soft, barely audible sound. A faint whisper, as if someone was calling her name. Claire! Her heart skipped a beat. She spun around, her flashlight sweeping the room. Nothing. No one. She laughed nervously, her breath visible in the cold air. Get a grip, Claire. It's just the wind, she muttered to herself. But the whispering continued, growing louder, more urgent. She froze, listening carefully. This time, it was unmistakable. Claire, help us! Her blood ran cold. The voice was faint, distorted, as if coming from behind a wall or through the floorboards. It wasn't just the wind. Someone, or something, was here with her. She stepped back, her eyes darting around the room, her flashlight shaking in her hand. The voice didn't make sense. The house was supposed to be abandoned. There was no one left. The Valmonts were gone, and the mansion had stood empty for years. And yet, the voice continued. Please, don't leave us! Something stirred in the air, a heavy, oppressive presence that seemed to settle around her, pressing down on her chest. Her heartbeat quickened. Claire turned to leave, but her feet wouldn't move. It was as though the house itself had grabbed hold of her, refusing to let her go. She felt a cold hand brush against her shoulder, and she spun around, her heart pounding in her throat. But there was no one there. The voice came again, louder now, as though it was right behind her. Help us, we're trapped in the house. Claire's breath came in shallow gasps as panic gripped her. She turned toward the source of the voice, her mind racing. What was happening? Who was speaking to her? The Valmonts? Was it them, or something else? She could feel the temperature drop even further, the air thick with a presence she couldn't explain. And then, from the darkness at the end of the hall, a shape emerged. It was a man, his figure blurry, like a shadow that refused to solidify. He was tall, dressed in dark clothing, his face obscured by the darkness. His eyes, however, gleamed with a faint, unnatural light, piercing through the gloom. "Help us!" he whispered again, his voice hoarse, desperate. "Please, before it's too late!" Claire stumbled backward, her heart racing, her mind screaming for her to run. But she couldn't. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the figure, drawn to him like a moth to a flame. There was something compelling about him, something that felt familiar. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice shaking. The man stepped closer, his form still flickering in and out of focus. "We are the Valmonts. We are trapped, Claire. Trapped in this house, forever. And so are you." Her stomach twisted. "No, no, this can't be real." The figure reached out, his hand extending toward her. She could feel the chill radiating from it, colder than the air around her. "You opened the door, Claire. You've come to finish what was started so many years ago." Before she could react, the room seemed to tilt, the walls warping and twisting as if the very foundation of the house was buckling. The temperature plummeted, and Claire felt her legs weaken, the world spinning around her. She had to get out. She had to leave. But as she turned to flee, the door slammed shut in front of her, and the voice came again. "You can't escape. Not now. Not ever." The whisper grew louder, louder still, until it was deafening, consuming her thoughts, drowning out everything else. The house had her now. There was no way out. The darkness swallowed her whole. The air in the mansion was thick, like a heavy blanket smothering her every breath. Claire stood frozen in the middle of the room, her heart pounding in her chest as she stared at the figure before her. The tall, shadowy man who had claimed to be Victor Valmont, the patriarch of the long-dead family, was still standing there, his glowing eyes fixed on her with an intensity that felt both knowing and sorrowful. Claire tried to steady her breathing, but her body refused to cooperate. Every muscle felt weak, and her limbs shook with an icy chill that seemed to come from within her bones. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. This was a nightmare. This couldn't be real. She had to be hallucinating. Victor Valmont, the man who had died in this house with his wife all those years ago, was supposed to be long gone. "Why are you doing this?" Claire's voice trembled as she demanded an answer, though she wasn't sure she even wanted to hear it. "Why are you haunting me? Why are you here?" The shadowy figure tilted his head slightly, a hollow sadness in his expression. "We don't want to haunt you," he said, his voice soft but tinged with a pain that seemed to echo from the depths of time. "We only want freedom. The same freedom we never had." Claire's heart raced. The words didn't make sense, but something about the figure's presence, the weight of his sorrow, made her feel that this wasn't just a random haunting. This was something much deeper, something tied to the house, to the curse that had bound the Valmonts for so long. "What happened to you?" she asked, unable to stop herself. "What happened to your family?" Victor Valmont's shadowy figure seemed to stiffen, and for a moment Claire could feel the room grow colder. The walls seemed to close in on her, as though the house itself was reacting to the memories being stirred. "It was that night," he began, his voice low and distant. "The night we died. We didn't just die in our sleep. No, it was much more than that. We were taken. Trapped by something we couldn't understand, something that has lived in this house far longer than we did. The curse we carried was not just a family secret, it was a warning. A warning that someone would come to free us, or to bind us forever." Claire's breath caught in her throat. She had heard the rumors about the Valmonts, the whispers of strange rituals, of something dark that had been practiced in the mansion. But she had dismissed them as mere gossip, folklore. Now, standing here, Hearing Victor's voice echo through the walls, she realized that there was more truth in those tales than she had ever imagined. "Who did this to you?" Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who trapped you here?" Victor's form flickered for a moment, his figure becoming even more translucent, as though he was slipping in and out of reality. "It wasn't a who," he said. "It was a what. The house itself. This place, it was built on cursed ground, long before we even arrived. And when we moved here, when we made it our home, we unknowingly invited the curse into our lives. It's not just the mansion that's haunted, Claire. It's the land itself, the earth beneath your feet. The shadows you see, they are the manifestation of an ancient force, one that has lived here long before your time." Claire's mind reeled. The house had always felt off to her, even as she stepped through its decaying halls earlier that night. But now, hearing Victor's words, she understood that this wasn't just a haunted house, it was an anchor for something far older and more terrifying. She stepped back, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on her. "So, what do you want from me?" she asked, her voice shaking. "What do you want me to do?" Victor's form seemed to pause, and Claire could sense the shift in the air around her. The temperature dropped even further, and the shadows in the room lengthened, stretching toward her like 1,000 unseen hands. "We don't want you to do anything, Claire," Victor replied, his voice now tinged with desperation. "But you must understand, you've already done it. You've opened the door. The moment you stepped into this house, you allowed the curse to begin anew. It wasn't a mistake. You were meant to be here, just as we were meant to be trapped." Claire felt the room spin. The walls seemed to close in tighter, the shadows wrapping around her like a vice. She struggled to breathe, her chest tightening with fear and disbelief. "No," she whispered. "I didn't come here to open anything. I came here to write a story. I had no idea." Victor's form flickered again, this time more violently, and his voice grew louder, filled with a kind of frantic urgency. "You are not here by choice, Claire. This place, it chooses who it calls to. It calls to those who are destined to come and set things right, or become part of the curse." Claire's heart raced as she staggered backward, her mind struggling to comprehend what Victor was saying. She had thought she was simply exploring the mansion, looking for a story for her article. But now, she realized, this wasn't just a random adventure. She had been drawn here, pulled into the web of a curse that had been alive for centuries. The floor beneath her feet creaked ominously as she backed toward the door, her eyes never leaving Victor's flickering form. "How do I stop this? How do I undo whatever I've done?" Victor's figure seemed to sag, his form almost disappearing into the darkness. "You can undo it," he whispered. "But you can end it." The room seemed to pulse with energy, as though the mansion itself was alive, breathing in time with the rhythm of Claire's heart. She was trapped. There was no escaping it now. The house had claimed her, just as it had claimed the Valmonts. And now, she had to make a choice. Victor's voice, now faint, echoed one last time. "The curse will not stop until it has a new soul to claim. If you leave, you'll bring it with you." Claire turned, her feet moving without thought, her mind still racing. She had to escape, had to get out of this place before it consumed her. But even as she ran, she knew the truth. There was no leaving Brampton Hollow, not really. The house, the shadows, the curse, it would follow her. It would follow anyone who dared open the door. As she reached the mansion's front door, she slammed it open with all her strength. The cold air outside hit her like a slap, and for the briefest moment, Claire thought she was free. But then she heard it. A low, hollow sound, like the wind whispering her name. And that's when she saw it, a shadow, stretching from the mansion, following her like a dark ribbon, twisting and pulling at her ankles. The curse hadn't let go. Not yet.